The air in the funeral home carried the cloying scent of lilies, too many lilies, as I stood beside my daughter's casket. Alice was only 32. The doctors said it was an aneurysm, something that had been lurking in her brain since birth. They said it happened quickly, that she wouldn't have suffered, as if that was supposed to comfort me. I couldn't bring myself to touch the polished mahogany of her casket. My fingers trembled just inches away from it. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. Parents shouldn't bury their children. That's what everyone kept saying to me in hushed tones, as if I needed reminding of how wrong this all was. "Mom!" The voice came from behind me, a hand on my shoulder. It was Jenny, my youngest. Her eyes were swollen, her makeup slightly smeared, despite obvious attempts to keep it intact. "It's almost time. They're asking if you want a few more minutes before they close it." Close it. Such a simple phrase for such a final act. I nodded, not trusting my voice. When Jenny stepped away, I finally placed my hand on the casket, feeling the cool, polished surface beneath my palm. "Goodbye, my sweet girl," I whispered. The service was a blur. I remember the minister speaking about Alice's kindness, her work with children at the elementary school, her bright smile. I remember faces turned toward me with that special kind of pity reserved for mothers who've lost children. But mostly, I remember Robert. My son-in-law sat in the front row opposite our family, straight-backed and composed, his face a mask of controlled grief. Not once did his eyes redden or his voice crack when he delivered his eulogy. He spoke about their 5 years of marriage like he was giving a business presentation, listing Alice's qualities as if they were bullet points on a slideshow. Something about his composure unsettled me. It was too perfect, too practiced. After the service, people gathered at Robert and Alice's house, the beautiful colonial they'd bought 2 years ago in Fairfield, Connecticut. I stood in their living room, surrounded by photographs of my daughter's life with him. Wedding photos, vacation snapshots, candid moments I'd never seen. In each one, Alice's smile reached her eyes, while Robert's seemed to stop at his lips. I was staring at their wedding portrait when Robert approached, crystal tumbler in hand, filled with amber liquid. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice as cool and smooth as the glass he held, "there's been quite a turnout." "She was loved," I replied, my voice cracking on the last word, "by so many people." Robert nodded, a single economical motion. "Yes, she was." He sipped his drink, his eyes never leaving mine. "I've been meaning to talk to you about some things. Arrangements." Arrangements? My mind was foggy with grief, unable to process what he might mean. "Alice's things," he clarified. "I'll be packing them up next week. I thought you might want some mementos." I stared at him. "Next week? Robert, it's too soon. Is there a proper timeline for moving forward?" His question sounded rehearsed, like he'd been preparing for this conversation. "The grief counselor I've been seeing says that removing painful reminders can be therapeutic." Grief counselor? The words slipped out before I could stop them. "You've been seeing one already?" The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. "I believe in being proactive about mental health, Elizabeth. Something Alice always appreciated about me." The way he said my daughter's name, so casual, so unaffected, sent a chill through me. 5 days. It had been 5 days since she collapsed in their kitchen. 5 days since the hospital called. 5 days since the word deceased entered my world and refused to leave. "I'd like to be involved," I said, finding strength in my voice I didn't know was there. "When you go through her things, there are family heirlooms, items from her childhood. I'm quite capable of identifying what might have sentimental value." Robert interrupted. He finished his drink and set the empty glass on a nearby bookshelf rather than using a coaster, something I knew would have irritated Alice. "I'll set aside what I think you might want. That's not Elizabeth." He cut me off again, lowering his voice as a small group of mourners passed by. "I understand you're grieving, we all are, but you need to understand something too." His eyes, grey and cold as winter slate, fixed on mine. "Your grief does not take precedence here. Your grief is not welcome to disrupt the process of moving forward." My heart seemed to stop in my chest. The noise of the reception faded to a distant hum. "Your grief," he repeated, enunciating each word with careful precision, "is not welcome here." Before I could respond, he turned away, shoulders straight, posture perfect, to greet an arriving couple, friends of his I didn't recognize. I stood frozen, his words echoing in my head, as I watched him seamlessly transition into the role of gracious, grieving widower. In that moment, staring at the back of his expensive suit, I realized something that sent ice through my veins. I had never really known the man my daughter married, and now I wasn't sure I wanted to. But as I looked around at the home Alice had made, at her books still on the shelves, and her throw pillows still arranged on the couch, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't walk away. Not when something felt so terribly, inexplicably wrong. 2 weeks after Alice's funeral, I found myself sitting in my car outside their house, her house, staring up at darkened windows. It was nearly midnight. Robert's sleek BMW wasn't in the driveway, which was the only reason I'd worked up the courage to come. Jenny thought I was losing my mind. "Mom, you need to see someone," she'd said earlier that day over coffee. A grief counselor, like Robert's doing. The mention of Robert's grief counseling had triggered something in me. Since the funeral, I'd called 3 times to ask about going through Alice's belongings. Each time Robert had deflected, saying he was busy, it wasn't a good time, he'd call me when he was ready. But yesterday I'd driven by and seen garbage bags on the curb, large black contractor bags, bulging with what could only be my daughter's life. I'd pulled over and, checking that no neighbors were watching, opened one. Inside were Alice's clothes, her favorite sweaters, jeans, even the handmade quilt my mother had given her when she graduated college. I'd taken the quilt and one sweater before tying the bag shut again, shaking with a mixture of grief and outrage. Now I sat with a spare key in my hand, the one Alice had given me years ago for emergencies. Was this an emergency? Probably not in any legal sense, but it felt like one to my heart. I entered through the side door that led into the kitchen. The house was eerily quiet and immaculate. No dirty dishes, no mail scattered on counters, nothing out of place. It looked staged, like a model home rather than a place where people actually lived. Had it always been this way? I tried to remember from my previous visits, but those memories were now colored by grief and suspicion. I made my way upstairs, moving carefully in the darkness, guided only by the dim light from street lamps filtering through windows. The master bedroom door was partially open. I hesitated before pushing it wider. The room had been transformed. Gone were Alice's colorful throw pillows, her stack of novels on the nightstand, her reading lamp with the mosaic shade she'd bought in Santa Fe. The bed was made with precision, a monochromatic grey duvet replacing the teal bedding my daughter had loved. It looked like a hotel room, impersonal, spotless. I opened her closet, empty except for a few of Robert's suits and shirts hanging with mathematical precision. Her dresser drawers, empty. The bathroom, scrubbed clean of any trace of her expensive face creams or colorful makeup palettes. It was as if Alice had never existed. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a sound, half gasp, half sob. This wasn't normal. This wasn't healthy. No one erases someone they loved this quickly, this thoroughly. On instinct, I checked the small jewelry box on the dresser. Alice's grandmother's sapphire earrings should have been there, along with the pearl necklace we'd given her for her 30th birthday. The box was empty. My mind was racing now. I moved to Robert's home office across the hall, flipping on the small desk lamp. Unlike the rest of the house, this room showed signs of recent activity, papers stacked neatly, laptop closed on the desk, a half-empty glass of what smelled like scotch. I hesitated, feeling like an intruder but driven by something stronger than propriety. I began opening drawers, not sure what I was looking for, but knowing I needed to find something, anything, that would explain the coldness I'd sensed in Robert, the wrongness that had been gnawing at me. The bottom desk drawer was locked. I jiggled it gently, then more forcefully, frustration building. Then I remembered Alice once mentioning that Robert kept spare keys in an old cigar box on his bookshelf. I found it, opened it with trembling fingers, and located a small silver key. The drawer slid open to reveal a stack of folders, neatly labelled. Most contained financial statements, but one caught my eye. Alice Medical. I opened it and began reading through documents, most of which I didn't understand. Medical reports, test results, doctor's notes. Then I found a letter dated 3 months ago. I read it twice, my blood running cold. Mr. Harrington, as discussed in our consultation, the results of Mrs. Harrington's tests show no evidence of cerebral aneurysm or any vascular abnormalities. Her headaches are most likely stress-related or possibly migraine-adjacent. No evidence of aneurysm, but that's what killed her. That's what everyone said killed her. I dug deeper into the folder and found insurance policies. A life insurance policy taken out on Alice just 6 months ago for $2 million, with Robert as the sole beneficiary, and an application for another policy, dated just 2 weeks before her death, for an additional $3 million. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. A terrible suspicion was forming, one so horrific I could barely allow the thought to take shape. I needed to find her actual autopsy report, needed to know exactly what happened to my daughter. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway sent ice through my veins. Headlights swept across the room as Robert's BMW turned in. I quickly returned the papers to their folder, placed it in the drawer, locked it, and returned the key to the cigar box. I turned off the desk lamp and moved quickly to the hallway, my heart hammering. The front door opened as I reached the top of the stairs. "Hello?" Robert's voice carried upwards, suspicious and sharp. "Is someone here?" I froze, weighing my options. I could try to sneak out the back, but if he caught me fleeing it would look worse. Something in me, perhaps the same steel my daughter had inherited, made me decide to face him. I descended the stairs, watching his expression shift from alarm to recognition to cold anger. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice controlled but tight. "Breaking and entering is a crime, you know." "Alice gave me a key," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I came to get some of her things." "At midnight?" He set his briefcase down, never taking his eyes off me. "Interesting choice." "I've been calling," I said, reaching the bottom step. "You haven't returned my calls." "I've been busy." He shrugged off his coat, hanging it precisely on the rack by the door. "Dealing with everything." "Everything," I repeated, like throwing away her clothes, her quilt, emptying her closets like she never existed. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "My therapist suggested—" "I don't care what your therapist suggested." The force of my own voice surprised me. "That was my daughter. Those were her things. You had no right." "I had every right," he cut in, his voice razor-sharp. "This is my house. She was my wife. And she was my child for 27 years before she was your wife for 5, I shot back. "What happened to her, Robert? Really?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something cold and calculating. "She died of an aneurysm, you know that." "Do I?" I took a step toward him. "Because I just saw a medical report saying she had no aneurysm, no vascular abnormalities at all." For just an instant, Robert's perfect composure cracked. His eyes widened slightly, his lips parted in surprise. Then the mask slipped back into place. "You went through my private papers." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I admitted, "and I'm going to go through a lot more, Robert, starting with the medical examiner's report." "Get out!" His voice was soft, but vibrating with rage. "Get out of my house right now, or I'll call the police." I moved toward the door, my legs unsteady, but my resolve hardening with each step. At the threshold, I turned back to face him. "Whatever happened to my daughter?" I said, each word deliberate and clear. "I'm going to find out, and if you had anything to do with it, God help you." Robert's face remained impassive, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the banister. "Your grief," he said, echoing his words from the funeral, "has clearly affected your judgment. Don't come back here, Elizabeth." I walked out into the night, my mind reeling with questions and terrible suspicions. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear. My daughter's death was not what it seemed, and her husband knew more than he was saying. "Mrs. Peterson? Detective Ramirez?" The woman extended her hand across the desk, her grip firm and professional. "Thank you for coming in." It had been 3 days since my midnight confrontation with Robert. 3 days of barely sleeping, of researching medical examiners and aneurysms and poison symptoms. 3 days of Jenny looking at me with increasing concern, suggesting grief counselors and medication. But I wasn't crazy. I knew what I'd seen. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk at the police station. The room was small but neat, with case files stacked in orderly piles. "You mentioned concerns about your daughter's death," Detective Ramirez said, her dark eyes studying me carefully. "Alice Harrington, correct? Died approximately 3 weeks ago of what was ruled a cerebral aneurysm." "That's what I was told," I confirmed, "but I have reason to believe that's not what happened." I explained what I'd found in Robert's office. The medical report stating Alice had no aneurysm, the life insurance policies. I told her about Robert's cold behavior, the way he'd erased Alice from their home almost immediately. As I spoke, Detective Ramirez took notes, her expression revealing nothing. When I finished, she set down her pen. "Mrs. Peterson, grief can sometimes make us see connections that aren't there." "This isn't grief talking," I interrupted, pulling a folder from my bag. "This is evidence." I'd made copies of what I could remember from the medical report, names, dates, the doctor who'd examined Alice. I'd also brought photographs of the garbage bags at the curb and a timeline of Robert's behavior since Alice's death. Detective Ramirez reviewed my materials, her expression gradually shifting from professional detachment to focused interest. "The medical examiner's report did indicate an aneurysm," she said finally, "but if your daughter had been examined 3 months ago and cleared—" She tapped her pen against her desk. "It would be unusual. Can you get access to her medical records? Her actual autopsy report?" "With probable cause, yes." She gathered my papers into a neat stack. "Let me make some inquiries. It may take time." "Time is something I have plenty of," I said. "Justice for my daughter is all I'm asking for." Detective Ramirez nodded. "I understand. And Mrs. Peterson, until we know more, it might be best if you kept your distance from Mr. Harrington." I left the police station feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Someone was listening. Someone was taking me seriously. That feeling lasted exactly 2 days. I was washing dishes when my doorbell rang. Jenny had gone back to her apartment in Boston, so I was alone in the house that suddenly felt too big, too quiet. I dried my hands and went to answer it. Robert stood on my porch, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice pleasant, as if our last meeting had never happened. "May I come in? I think we need to talk." Every instinct told me to slam the door, but curiosity won out. I stepped back, allowing him into my living room. "Detective Ramirez paid me a visit yesterday," he said without preamble, declining my automatic offer of a seat. "She had some very interesting questions about Alice's medical history." My stomach tightened. "Did she?" "Yes." He paced slowly, examining the family photos on my mantel with detached interest. "She seemed particularly interested in a doctor's report you claim to have seen, one saying Alice had no aneurysm." "I didn't claim anything. I saw it." Robert turned to face me, his expression almost pitying. "Elizabeth, I understand grief can do terrible things to a person's mind. Don't," I held up a hand, "don't you dare try to gaslight me, Robert. I know what I saw." "What you think you saw," he corrected gently. "But here's the interesting thing. I gave Detective Ramirez full access to all of Alice's medical records, including the report from Dr. Patel 3 months ago, which clearly documents early signs of a vascular weakness, precisely in the area where the aneurysm later occurred." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "That's not possible. The report I saw—" "Never existed," Robert finished for me. "Just like the imaginary life insurance policy for $3 million. He shook his head sadly. "There is a policy, yes. Standard coverage through my firm. 500,000, not 2 million. Detective Ramirez has confirmed all of this. My mind was racing. Had I misread the documents? No. I knew what I'd seen. You changed them, I said, the realization dawning. You replaced the originals. Robert sighed heavily. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're not well, Elizabeth. Grief has distorted your perception of reality. Get out, I whispered, anger rising like a tide. Get out of my house. I've spoken with Jenny, he continued as if I hadn't spoken. She's very concerned about you. We both think you should consider inpatient treatment for a while, somewhere you can get the help you need. You spoke to my daughter about me. Rage and disbelief collided in my chest. You have no right. As Alice's husband, I feel a certain responsibility toward her family, he said smoothly, even now. I stepped closer to him, close enough to see the tiny lines around his eyes, the perfect knot in his silk tie. What did you do to her, Robert? What did you do to my daughter? For the briefest moment, something cold and alien flickered in his eyes, something that confirmed all my worst suspicions. Then it was gone, replaced by practiced concern. I loved her, he said simply, and I'm trying to help you now, despite your accusations. Think about treatment, Elizabeth. For Jenny's sake, if not your own. After he left, I sat in my silent house, my thoughts spinning in desperate circles. He'd managed to discredit me with the police. He'd spoken to Jenny, planting seeds of doubt about my mental state. He was systematically isolating me, just as I suspected he might have isolated Alice. My cell phone rang, startling me. Unknown number. Hello? Mrs. Peterson? It's Maria, Detective Ramirez. Her voice was low, urgent. I need you to listen carefully. Don't react. Don't write anything down. My heart began to pound. I'm listening. The medical records Mr. Harrington provided were comprehensive. Too comprehensive. Some of the dates don't align, and I spoke with the medical examiner who performed your daughter's autopsy. He remembers being pressured to expedite the process, to focus only on confirming the aneurysm diagnosis. By whom? He's not certain. But the request came with letterhead from Harrington's law firm. A pause. There's something else. Preliminary toxicology showed unusual levels of warfarin in your daughter's system. Warfarin. The word was unfamiliar. Blood thinner, commonly prescribed for patients at risk of clots. In high doses, it can cause brain hemorrhages that mimic aneurysms. Her voice dropped even lower. We're reopening the investigation, but quietly. Mr. Harrington has connections in this town, influential connections. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a cold dread. He was just here. He's trying to have me committed, saying I'm delusional. Classic move, Detective Ramirez said grimly. Discredit the accuser. Listen, we need time to build a case. Evidence, not suspicions. Can you stay with someone for a while? Somewhere he wouldn't think to look? I thought of my sister in Arizona. We hadn't spoken in years after a falling out. But this was life or death. Yes, I can leave tonight. Good. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Not even Jenny. Just for now. She paused. We're going to get him, Mrs. Peterson, but we have to do it right. 6 months later, I sat in a courtroom watching Robert Harrington being led away in handcuffs, his perfect composure finally shattered. The evidence, when properly investigated, had been damning. The warfarin he'd been secretly administering to Alice for months. The falsified medical records. The testimony from his former assistant about documents she'd been asked to shred. The second life insurance policy application that had raised red flags at the insurance company. Detective Ramirez, Maria, as I now called her, sat beside me as the courtroom emptied. It's over, she said quietly. But it wasn't over. It would never be over. My daughter was still gone. The man she had trusted, had loved, had systematically poisoned her for money, had planned it for months. What do I do now? I asked. More to myself than to her. Maria's hand covered mine briefly. You live. You remember her. You make sure her story helps other women recognize the warning signs. Outside the courthouse, Jenny waited for me. Our relationship had been strained when the truth about Robert first emerged. She had believed him when he said I was unwell, but time and evidence had healed that wound. "Mom," she said, embracing me, "let's go home." Home. The concept seemed both foreign and essential now. But as we walked away from the courthouse into the bright autumn sunlight, I felt Alice with me. Not in some mystical sense, but in the determination that had carried me through these dark months. In the refusal to let Robert's gaslighting make me doubt what I knew to be true. My grief had not been welcome in Robert's perfectly ordered world, but my grief had been the one thing that had ultimately brought him to justice. "Your grief is not welcome here," he had told me that day at the funeral. He had been wrong. My grief had been exactly where it needed to be, and it had been stronger than his lies.